So this week we are talking about distance, daily distance and walking speed. Why? Why not? I'll explain why just coming up. So why are we talking about walking distance and speed? Now there are going to be some of you watching this, you know who you are, who will say, Rob, it doesn't matter how far you walk every day, it doesn't matter what speed you walk each day, and to a degree I would agree with you. If you have unlimited time to walk your Camino, if you're walking on a Camino with lots of infrastructure where every few kilometres you're going to reach an albergue or a hostel, whatever, I would absolutely agree with that. If you're carrying a tent, no problems at all, you stop wherever. There's a lot of traditionalists who will say, I'll just walk until I feel like stopping and then I'll kind of look around for accommodation or pitch my tent or whatever. I think the majority of pilgrims these days like to plan a little bit. I certainly do. I mean, you may get an impression from some of my videos that I over-plan. I kind of do because it's an interesting aspect of the Camino for me. I love to research the route and things like that. Once I'm underway, nah, not really at all. I kind of pretty much free will. I've kind of relaxed a lot more on recent Caminos now. I tend to maybe book the next night only. So I'm booking accommodation maybe one night ahead. But maybe 30–40% of the time I'm not even doing that, particularly if there's Donativo albergues and places like that I'm staying in. So why is it important to understand daily distances and daily speeds? It's interesting online, a very common question with people walking their first Camino is, I'm planning to walk from San Juan to Santiago, how many days do I need to allow? Or, I've got 10 days to walk the Camino Portuguese, where shall I start? This sort of stuff. So you can see already that it's quite important to kind of understand what a comfortable daily distance is for you and how fast you walk and all that kind of stuff. Before I get into that though, just a word of caution, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. If you are walking a Camino for the first time with somebody, maybe you're a couple, you're going with a friend, something like that, a word of caution. It is very, very difficult to walk the same speed as someone else, and everybody has different levels of capability and comfort when it comes to a daily distance. So it needs compromise. I haven't met any couples walking, I don't think, that are comfortable walking at the same speed. I walked with a lovely couple last year for a couple of weeks on the Via de la Plata, and one would sort of go ahead a bit. I walked with a couple of guys, friends from the US who were walking together, and again, one would go ahead a bit. Why is that? Why does that happen? Well, walking at someone else's speed is actually really awkward, particularly if one is taller than the other, one's fitter than the other, and trying to adjust your speed to someone else's pace can actually cause injury. Excuse me. So for example, I'm only 5'7", but my wife's 5'1", so when we're walking together, I do not try to walk at her sort of short pace. It would be really uncomfortable. And so what tends to happen is, we'll not by plan or design, but we'll kind of drift backwards and forwards. I might stop and take lots of photographs, and Pat will go on ahead. Pat likes to steam on up the hills and not stop. I like to stop. So we're sort of, passing each other along the way, but not trying to walk at the same speed as each other. So just a little bit of a tip if you're walking with someone. It can be very difficult to walk at the same speed. Likewise, daily distances are going to vary in most cases. So my comfortable distance, for example, is between 20 and 25 Ks, depending on terrain. I can do the odd 30, but because I have knee issues and tendon issues and things like that, it really starts to get painful at that distance. Above 30, it really is very painful, and once I hit about 35, I generally need a rest day to recover. So it's just, because we all have different bodies and health and so on. So my real comfort spot is probably 22 to 26, something like that. Pat, on the other hand, her comfort spot is probably 18 to 22. And so it's a little bit like if you've been in the Scouts or something like that, you know, and you're walking as a scout troop, hiking as a scout troop, you walk to the pace of the slowest person. In this case, you're walking your distance to the comfort level of the slower person, if you like, if that makes sense. So planning for our next Camino, I'm planning stages, you know, no more than 22 if I can, so that Pat's not too uncomfortable, and I'll find it easy, which is good. Yeah, confession, I might be carrying a bit of her gear, so that'll help me out too. Okay, so that's the tip. It's you know, don't, if you're the stronger, faster one, you know, do think of the person that you're walking with. You're really going to put them under a bit of physical strain, trying to keep up with you or walk your distances. So it's about compromise. So why is distance or speed important? Well, look, there's going to be some people watching this, and you know who you are. You do comment on this channel. There's going to be people who say, it doesn't matter, why would it matter at all, you know, how far you're comfortable walking each day? Why would it matter at all about the distance? And I would agree to a large extent. If you've got kind of unlimited time to walk your Camino, if you're walking a route that has loads and loads of infrastructure like the Camino Frances, you know, on those sort of routes, you really can just walk. I was going to say walk until you drop, but that wouldn't be too much fun. But you can walk until you want to stop. You know, one day you might walk 20 Ks and think, oh, I think we'll stop here. And, you know, within a few Ks, there'll be a hostel or an albergue or something. The next day you might walk 30 Ks. And, you know, you're feeling a lot better and you want to just stride out there and have a good long distance. So you can do that on Caminos with lots of infrastructure. Likewise, if you've got unlimited time, it doesn't really matter how far you walk each day. But I think for the vast majority of people walking the Camino, they do have some limits on time. I certainly do. I mean, I have a full-time job. I'm lucky that I can take fairly large blocks of time. I mean, my last Camino was 60 days, but I do need to have an idea of how long I'm going to be away so that I can let those at work know, and I've really got to sort of stick to that timing. Okay, so let's get on to why distance and speed is important and how you might utilise that. So, a very simple way, knowing your comfortable daily distance is important to plan your Camino right from the start. So let's keep the numbers simple for my simple brain. Let's say you're going to walk the Frances from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It's 800 Ks, you've got 40 days, you need to be able to walk 20 Ks a day, assuming no rest days. That enables you to work out flights and so on. I mean, I don't live in Europe. It's pretty hard for us to get there. I'm flying from Australia. It's 24 hours of flying, you know, lots of travel planning, recuperation time once we arrive, all that kind of stuff. So I need to have a reasonable idea of how long it's going to take to walk this Camino, and then I throw in a few spare days for glitches. Why else might it be important? But depending on the route that you're walking, knowing your daily sort of distance capabilities can be quite important. So for last year, for example, walking the Via de la Plata, the logistics of that route can be quite tricky at times, because if you're not a really strong long distance walker. So for example, if my comfort level's, you know, around 25 Ks, there are days where it's 30 or 35 Ks. And so with that in mind, I'm knowing that's going to be a struggle for me. You know, that 30K day, I'm going to break it into an 18 and a 12. You know, some of the possibilities of breaking up the stages on that route are tricky. You know, you might end up with a 10, 12, 20, you know, instead of, you know, something a lot longer. So knowing your capability there is quite important, because on routes like that, you can't really kind of walk 25 Ks and then say, I think we'll stop. I've had enough for today. And you look around, there's nothing. Flat lands of wheat, you know, as far as the eye can see. So it's not as easy as, say, the Frances or something like that, where usually within a few Ks, there's going to be another village. Or, you know, I was going to say grab a bus. No, we don't grab buses. You don't grab buses, do you? But I suppose in an emergency you could. So it's fairly important to, I think, understand what your comfortable daily distance is. What about speed? Why is that important? Well, again, it's not really, but let me share why I like to understand what my walking speed is. Now, don't think for a minute that I'm walking with some kind of speedometer and checking my speed. I'm not. On my very first Camino, purely out of interest, I would run one of those walking apps. I think I used Strava, just to sort of see what my walking speed was and so on, because it helped me plan my day if I know how fast I'm walking. And I know that a reasonably fast walk for me is about 5 kilometres an hour. I probably average about 4.5 kilometres an hour. I'm probably one of the slowest pilgrims on the Camino, to be honest. If I think back to last year, did anyone walk slower than me? Any of the people that I met? I don't think so. I'm a real slow coach. It's like the, what is it, the hare and the tortoise, you know. I'm the tortoise. I might start out early and I'll arrive 2 hours after everybody else, but I plod along. But the speed that I actually work on is 3.5 Ks an hour. It's just a rough planning figure that I have in my head that I kind of worked out on my first Camino, and it's worked for me ever since. Why 3.5? Well, 3.5 allows for all my breaks. So if I'm stopping to take photographs and videos, stopping for breaks to have a drink or a snack, if I incorporate all of that, you know, from start to finish, I pretty much average 3.5 Ks an hour. I know when Pat's coming with me on my next Camino, it's probably going to be closer to 3 than 3.5. She walks a little bit slower than me. But it's a useful planning figure to have in my head. Why? Why does it matter? Well, it may be that we've booked some accommodation and I want to have an understanding of what time we might arrive. So, for example, I might have booked a hostel. I have to say my attitude towards booking has changed a bit over the last couple of years. You know, I used to book every day in advance, so I'd book the next day, book the next day, book the next day. I tend not to do that now. Probably 30 or 40% of the time I just don't bother booking because maybe I'm staying in a Donativo albergue or something like that. But I like to know roughly what time I'm going to arrive at the destination. That can be important if you've booked somewhere. So, for example, I stayed in a beautiful Casa Rural on the right at the end of the Camino San Andres last year. And it was quite amusing because I was sending WhatsApp messages to the owner and she was saying, oh, I've got to pick up the kids at, I can't remember what time it was, 2 o'clock. So if when you arrive, you know, I'm not there, I'll be back by 3 and all this kind of stuff. So it was quite handy that I was able to say to her, I'll be there by about 3:30, you know, somewhere between 3 and 4. You know, she wanted to know if I was having the evening meal and would I be there in time for the evening meal. Other places, you know, I might have booked a hostel or something like that, and they'll say, oh, look, you know, if you're not here by 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, we'll have to let your bed go. And so it's useful for me to know roughly what time I'm going to get there. And then if it looks like I'm running late, I'll call them and say, look, I'm running a bit late, I'll be there by 6, that kind of thing. So it could be quite useful to know roughly when you're going to arrive in places. The most important reason for me, though, knowing roughly when I'm going to arrive somewhere, is for the Menú del Día. Now, if you have never discovered Menú del Días on Camino, or if it's your first Camino, you must look out for them. I'll do another video on it, but the Pilgrims menu on the more popular routes is something that a lot of pilgrims eat. It's a set menu, fairly cheap, 10, 12 euros. It's okay. The Menú del Día, for a couple of euros more, is what the locals eat, and it's a much nicer meal. So the main meal for the locals tends to be at lunch, the Menú del Día in rural areas, and last orders for that is generally about 3 o'clock. Now you know why it's important to know when I'm going to arrive at my destination. It's important for me anyway. So I've got to be there by 3, if there's somewhere serving a menu del dia, of course. So give you a rough example. Let's say I'm walking somewhere. I'm walking to this village. It's going to be 25 k's away. I know I walk at about 3.5 k's an hour. What's 25 k's divided by 3.5? It's going to take me about 7 hours. So if I'm leaving at 7 a.m, I'm going to get there 7 plus 7, 14, 1400, 2 p.m. I'm going to get there about 2 p.m. Perfect. That'll give me time to check in, shower, get changed, and hopefully hunt out a menu del dia for lunch, and then sort of relax for the rest of the day. So I generally probably arrive a little bit earlier than that, but it's a nice, safe planning figure for me. If I'm setting out for the day, I know I'm going to roughly walk at about 3.5 k's an hour. So if I'm booking a meal or booking some accommodation, I can tell them roughly what time I'm going to get there. And generally I arrive a bit earlier. So having an understanding of your distance, can be quite useful. Just having a look at my notes here, anything I've talked about. Yeah, with long stages and things like that, it can be very useful to know. So again, on the Via de la Plata last year, there was, long for me, 27 k's was one. I think there was a 35, absolute killer. Knowing roughly how long that was going to take me was useful to plan what time I should start and, roughly what time I'd get there. If I was going to get there in time to check into accommodation and things like that. So there we go. A bit of a ramble again, I'm sorry about that, but distance, walking speed, is it important? No, not really, but it's nice to have a rough idea in the back of your mind, what's a comfortable daily distance for you, and maybe roughly, not what's your walking speed, but kind of what's your speed over the ground during the day. So I don't walk at 3.5 k's an hour, but it takes me 3.5 k's an hour to cover my daily distance, including all my stops and breaks and whatever whatever along the way. So sometimes that can be quite useful just to have in the back of your mind. Any further thoughts or tips from you on distances and speeds and things like that, do comment down below. I'm going to do another video coming up shortly talking about walking surfaces. I was delighted with my Camino last year, particularly on the Via de la Plata. The walking surfaces were glorious. And we're going to talk a little bit about different walking surfaces and the impact that can have on your feet and kind of what to look out for. So that'll be the next one. But thanks for watching, thanks for putting up with my rambling, and do comment down below if you've got any more tips on sort of planning daily distances and speeds. And I know there'll be a couple of you who say it doesn't matter at all, so feel free to comment that as well. Talk to you soon.